This is the all-new 2023 Range Rover Sport. It's the smaller sibling to the full-size Range Rover and is aimed at offering a sportier experience while still maintaining the luxurious aspects that come with the Range Rover nameplate. Now, in this infinitely popular and hyper-competitive SUV space, does the Range Rover Sport offer enough to consider buying one over a BMW or Mercedes? Alright, so let's start it off by talking about the exterior styling in this new Range Rover Sport. Overall, it looks pretty similar to the prior generation. It's a little bit more modern looking, a little cleaner, and maybe the best way to put it, it's got a simpler looking design. It's still got that aggressive and surprisingly muscular stance you're expecting from the Sport. Look at the fender bulges and the overall ride height configuration, plus the flush door handles are always a nice touch. Now, as good as I think the front end looks, I'm not so hot about the rear end of the Range Rover Sport. Now, I'm not really surprised because I felt the same way about the full-size Range Rover with those long skinny taillights, but nonetheless, maybe in time I might come around to this one as well. Next, let's move to the interior, where the biggest change you'll notice is with the tech, highlighted by the center 13.1-inch curved infotainment screen running Land Rover's latest software. The curved screen looks very cool and has great functionality. It's nice and big, easy to use, and the curved character gives it a unique dynamic. Now, the software itself. I was critical of Land Rover software when I drove the previous generation Sport SVR, and even though it's better here, it still suffers from being a little laggy. Otherwise, its strong suits are that it's pretty simple to use because things are laid out very nicely. It's got Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, and the overall graphics are very simple and modern looking. Next, you've got an even bigger screen at 13.7 inches acting as your gauges. These are good as well, very crisp graphics and font, works well with good functionality. So the interior size and comfort, starting off with size. So you've got a little less headroom compared to the X5, but more legroom. And at 5'11", I am very comfortable in here. I fit in here just fine. I would imagine somebody a couple inches taller than I am will also not have any issues. As far as comfort goes, I'm sitting in the base 20-way seat. It's heated, cooled, and the cushioning is out of this world. This seat bottom is probably one of the best seat bottoms I've ever sat in terms of comfort. It is very nice. The overall seating position, of course, the command seating position you get in Range Rovers is great, and the overall comfort level is wonderful. I would imagine driving this on a daily basis would be a dream. Now let's move to the back seats. Again, at 5'11", sitting behind myself, I have ample amounts of legroom and headroom. The comfort level is just as good as the seats in the front. It's got 4-zone climate control, so each section of the car can tune it in to their desire. It's got some USB chargers back there and a panoramic moonroof. Wrapping up the interior space with the trunk, the Sport has 32 cubic feet of space with the back seats up, and if you fold them down, 53 cubic feet. Two things I appreciate about this trunk are the electronic rear seat releases and the ability to lower the rear end of the car for easy loading and unloading. Using these buttons in the trunk, you can electronically lower and raise the second row seats, and also these buttons here lower the rear end of the car using the air suspension. Two small, but in my opinion, very useful features. Now let's talk about the engine details, and because this is the Dynamic SE trim level, you get a little bit more horsepower. So this engine is a 3-liter twin turbocharged inline 6-cylinder, and it generates 395 horsepower and 406 pounds-feet of torque. It's mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission, and it's putting power down to a rear-wheel drive bias all-wheel drive system. Now, all of this translates to a 0 to 60 time of 5.4 seconds, which is interestingly slower than the BMW X5. And I say interestingly because this has more power than a BMW X5, but nonetheless, a 1/10 of a second difference is not going to be noticeable in any daily driving situation. Next, the Sport is equipped with air suspension and adaptive dampers as standard, giving the ability to mess with the ride height and achieve that classic low ride height Range Rovers are known for. You get a choice at wheels, 21s, 22s, 23s. This one here today is equipped with 24-inch wheels. Next, let's talk about some off-roading stuff, even though nobody is taking their $90,000 Range Rover Sport off-roading. Open diff with torque vectoring, single speed transfer box, all wheel steering up to 7.3 degrees, and it even has the ability to tow up to 7,700 pounds, which is significant. Now let's get this thing on the road and see what it drives like. All right, so now let's see what this Land Rover Range Rover Sport feels like behind the wheel. Start stop is right here, right next to the shifter, foot on the brake. Starts up very, very quiet. Except for this thing keeps beeping at me, telling me that the ignition is on. And yes, I do know that, oh, actually my door is open. That's why it's beeping. Okay, now that that's all resolved, let's go for a quick spin in this new Range Rover Sport. Now, when you get into a Range Rover product, the command style driving position is immediately noticeable. You sit in one of these cars and it feels like you're just towering on top of everybody. The command style driving position is a perfect name, and I think Land Rover has really nailed this experience in their SUVs. You get in and it's very unique, the type of experience that it delivers. Now let's go ahead and test the acceleration. I'm going to put it in dynamic mode, also put the ride height in its lowest setting, lock it in, and let's see what this Range Rover Sport has in terms of acceleration. Sounds pretty good. Gets up and goes. All right. Definitely feel that it's obviously a big heavy SUV, but let's go ahead and downshift it to second now and mash. Takes a second to get rolling. Pretty good, pretty good. I like the urgency of this engine, and the overall speed sensation you're gonna get in this car is as you would expect in a car of this much weight and within this power range, right around the 400 horsepower and 400 pound-feet of torque. Now, two surprising things about this engine or the speed sensation. Number one is the overall immediacy and the urgency of this engine. And this kind of caught me off guard. I was expecting something a little different. And when you're driving this thing, the first thing you'll notice is how light or sensitive the throttle is and how urgent it is to kind of just get up and go. I was expecting something a little bit more lofty, a little bit more relaxed as far as its initial tip in and acceleration. But no, this is really being highlighted, I think, on purpose by Land Rover. They want to deliver that quote-unquote Land Rover Sport experience, and this initial kind of urgency from this motor and the acceleration, I believe, really delivers that. And the second thing is, this being an inline six-cylinder, my opinion is that inline six cylinders always sound better than V6s, and it's true here as well. And the surprising thing about all of that is this being a, I guess, quote-unquote regular SUV, the inline six-cylinder sounds really nice. And of course, it is pumped in with some noise on the interior, but still really sweet sounding inline six-cylinder in this Range Rover Sport. Now let's switch over and talk about the overall comfort and the suspension feel and those type of dynamics. So when you're in comfort mode with the suspension height or the ride height in normal, this is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful car to drive. It soaks up the bumps very nicely. It delivers a great lofty type of driving experience. That in conjunction with this seat, and this is probably one of, if not the most comfortable seats I've sat in an SUV. Specifically, this lower cushioning is like magic, like right underneath your butt. It is absolutely amazing how comfortable this seat is. So that paired with the overall comfort that the suspension delivers, this thing would be a dream to drive on a daily basis, and the overall suppleness and the ride comfort and luxury that it's delivering is fantastic. Now, one thing to keep in mind, because I've noticed that a lot of Range Rovers drive around in the lower ride height. So if you are planning on doing that, the ride does get a little choppier, and even further still if you're in dynamic mode, which is Land Rover speak for sport. So if you're in dynamic mode or even in comfort mode and you're in the lower ride height, the ride does get a little bouncier. And me personally, if you're looking for that luxury type of feedback, loftiness in your ride comfort, I personally would just stay away from the lowest ride height and stay in normal. But if you're gonna drive around in the low ride height, I mean, it's adequate, you can do it, but just keep in mind, you're not gonna get the most comfort out of your Land Rover Sport. So overall, what is this thing? I think there is some underlying hints of sportiness in this car, but from a overall high level driving dynamic, I believe this car is still more tailored for daily drivability, luxury, loftiness, comfort, and some underlying hint of sportiness. My opinion is that if you're looking for something sportier, and granted, I have not driven the new X5, but I have driven the prior X5, the prior gen, and the BMW Nature and the BMW X5 generally has a little bit more sportiness, and personally I would say that the X5 is going to feel a little sportier than this car. But this, if you're looking for overall comfort, daily drivability, loftiness, obviously the luxury and the prestige with the Range Rover nameplate, I think this is a fantastic, fantastic SUV. So with that, now let's close it out with some final thoughts. So that's the new Range Rover Sport. Overall, it's a wonderful SUV and has really cool looks. But is it better than a BMW X5? Now, granted, I've not driven the refreshed BMW X5, so this is somewhat of an on-paper type of thought process and comparison. But with that in mind, the Range Rover Sport and the BMW X5, both dimensionally and technology-wise, are pretty similar. Now, one thing that's not similar between the two is price. Base for base, the X5 comes in roughly $18,000 cheaper than the Range Rover Sport. And if you opt for the dynamic SE trim level like this one, that balloons close to $25,000. Now, one would say, yes, if I optioned in some of the standard features on the Range into the X5, that'll bring up the price, but still, there's roughly, again, a big price difference of $18,000 to $20,000. Now, is it really worth it? I can't really answer that because, again, I have not driven the 2024 X5, but one thing I can say is that that's a lot of money for two cars that are very similar in a lot of objective measures. So that's all I've got. If you've got any questions, please make sure you leave me a comment down below or send me a message on Instagram @DriveSteady. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.